Ferrari has raced in every single Formula One season since 1950. They've got the most wins, the most titles, and maybe the most important record of all, breaking their own drivers faster than anyone else. Driving for Ferrari is the dream seat that often becomes a nightmare, where success brings glory, but failure gets broadcast through press conferences and booing crowds. In this video, we're running through Prost, Alonso, Vettel, Hamilton, and even stand-ins like Mika Salo, showing how Ferrari turns champions into punchlines and solutions into bigger problems. If you like F1 rants, tap subscribe and let's get into it. And it all starts with one man who thought Ferrari would finally deliver his miracle: Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso, the eternal optimist who lost faith. Fernando Alonso's Ferrari years looked like the perfect fairy tale setup. The two-time champion arriving in 2010, Ferrari clearing out Kimi Raikkonen by ending his contract early, just to make room for him. They weren't subtle about it either. This was a full coronation. Alonso was supposed to be the man to drag Ferrari back to the top, the centerpiece of the next legendary chapter. And at first, it almost worked. In 2010, he came within touching distance of the title, fighting Vettel and Red Bull all season and taking it right down to the last race. It wasn't domination. The Ferrari wasn't the quickest package out there, but Alonso wrung every drop out of it. He was relentless, precise, and unshakably aggressive. The problem was never Alonso. It was that Ferrari's cars too often looked like they were designed by committee, then sabotaged by their own race strategy department. Ferrari backed him heavily, even bending rules to make sure his chances stayed alive. Think about Hockenheim 2010. Fernando is faster than you was code for clear team orders, and nobody doubted who Ferrari's number one was. In 2012, they even played with strategic grid penalties, like Massa taking one so Alonso could start on the clean side of the Austin grid. The team absolutely prioritized him. But even with that commitment, the machinery didn't match the ambition. The clearest miracle came in 2012. That Ferrari wasn't the fastest car. It was typically only third best, sometimes worse, but Alonso still dragged it into a championship fight. He pulled off wins in Malaysia, Germany, and Valencia, and somehow entered the final race in Brazil still in contention. He lost the title to Vettel by just 3 points. 3. It was one of the greatest if only seasons in modern F1, a driver putting together arguably his best campaign only to be let down by the limitations of what Ferrari could put under him. And here's where it got brutal. Year after year, Alonso finished runner-up or close to it. Podium after podium, fans chanting his name, rivals praising his racecraft, and yet no crown in red. The cracks began to show by 2013. After the Hungarian Grand Prix, asked what birthday gift he wanted, Alonso said simply, "Someone else's car." It was half joke, half dagger. This wasn't the voice of a driver inspired by his team's progress. It was the sound of a champion running out of patience, because every time Ferrari appeared to fix something, they broke something else. A car faster down the straights? Sure. But now it understeered through every corner. A bold, strategic rethink? Half the time, it was less strategy and more the engineers pulling ideas out of a hat. Alonso wasn't just fighting Vettel, he was fighting Ferrari's dysfunction every single weekend. Eventually, even Alonso, famous for his optimism and grit, stopped believing in Ferrari's long-term promise. His big solution? Leave. In 2015, he bolted for McLaren, betting on a revival with Honda power. Instead, he swapped constant heartbreak for outright humiliation, stuck with an engine so fragile it struggled to reach the finish. Ferrari had frustrated him, but McLaren Honda ensured he'd spend his so-called fresh start parked at the side of the track. And as Alonso faded from Ferrari's orbit, another legend made his entrance, the so-called professor, who thought he could outthink Maranello's madness. What happened next proved brainpower alone isn't enough inside Ferrari. Alain Prost, the professor who failed his final exam. Alain Prost arrived at Ferrari in 1990, carrying his reputation as the professor, the master strategist who outthought rivals and turned data into victories. On paper, pairing one of the smartest drivers in Formula One with the most iconic team in history felt like perfect symmetry. In reality, it was a mismatch. A detail-obsessed driver stepping into a garage still run like it was the 1970s. Prost came fresh off his McLaren years, battling Ayrton Senna, and expected a similar level of precision and structure. What Ferrari actually handed him was a loose collection of politics, delays, and direction changes. The team lacked a leader who could control the chaos or balance multiple egos, and the egos were massive because Prost's teammate wasn't some rookie he could mold. It was Nigel Mansell. Two alphas in the same box, competing not only against rivals but against each other. The internal fight over car setups and even swapping chassis only made things messier. It was less a unified squad and more a faculty lounge argument with no headmaster. On track, Prost almost pulled a miracle in 1990, pushing the Ferrari 641 into a championship fight against Senna and Red Bull Racing's predecessor, Honda-powered McLaren. He kept it alive until the infamous collision at Suzuka, losing the title in brutal fashion. But what looked like the foundation for redemption turned into decline. By 1991, Ferrari's car development had drifted completely. The 642 and later 643 arrived lacking pace, while updates were inconsistent and often useless. Prost thrived in environments where every knob turn was measured and explained. In Maranello, the plan seemed to change whatever way the wind, and sometimes the Italian press, was blowing. And then came the infamous soundbite. After the 1991 Japanese Grand Prix, where his Ferrari's shock absorbers failed and left the car handling horribly, Prost called it a horrible truck to drive. It wasn't just anger, it was a direct, specific criticism of a mechanical problem that made the machine undrivable. But in Ferrari's culture, where national pride was wrapped tightly around the red car, even an accurate description sounded like heresy. That one quote became the defining headline, sealing Prost's fate. Ferrari didn't forgive or forget. Just before the season finale in Australia, they sacked Prost, fired a three-time world champion before he could even take the last race start. The professor had come in hoping to write another textbook on success. Instead, Ferrari marked him absent from the final exam. Jean Alesi, left behind as his teammate, would later endure mountains of DNFs, proving it wasn't Prost's talent that was the problem. It was the machinery and the management collapsing around it. Prost didn't quit driving altogether, though. He took 1992 as a sabbatical, watching from the sidelines, and then came back with Williams in 1993 to win his fourth world title. That return was the ultimate proof. Ferrari hadn't broken him, they'd simply wasted him. The biggest lesson from the professor's time at Maranello wasn't about him at all. It was how Ferrari could take one of the sharpest minds in racing and grind it down to failure. And that's what makes the next case even more intriguing. Because if Ferrari couldn't support Prost, what happens when they get someone who's already the most decorated driver in the sport? Lewis Hamilton, the GOAT who met his match. Lewis Hamilton's arrival at Ferrari in 2025 was billed as the ultimate union. The seven-time world champion finally in red, the Tifosi chanting his name, and headlines promising a new dynasty. He wasn't just a driver hire, he was an entire press release come to life. Day one felt like the start of a rescue mission. But once he actually got behind the wheel, the script flipped immediately. Instead of Ferrari being saved by Hamilton, it looked like Ferrari was pulling Hamilton down to its own level. The problems showed up right away on Saturdays. Hamilton, known for miracle laps and pulling speed from nowhere, suddenly found himself outside the top 10 more than once. At Hungary, after qualifying only 12th, he went full self-critique on the radio, calling himself useless. This wasn't Hamilton being modest. It was a driver with 105 career wins realizing that nothing he tried was working. It exposed how deep the struggles went. Not his lack of ability, but the Ferrari package flipping every strength of his into a frustration point. The frustration doubled when race strategy got involved. Ferrari have been famous for years for pulling risky or simply baffling pit stop choices. For Hamilton, a master of precision, it was like playing chess while the pit wall randomly shoved pieces off the board. Wrong tires, late calls, gambles that didn't make sense. It all bled into the same old story with the radio clips sounding more like therapy sessions than race engineering. And yet, there were flashes of grit. The Shanghai Sprint stood out. Hamilton crossed the line first, and for a moment it looked like the GOAT had cracked Ferrari's curse. Fans erupted, the garage went wild, and everyone dared to think this might be the turning point. But it was just a sprint race. One short Saturday win couldn't erase a season where consistent podiums were missing, and his longest drought without a top 3 finish stretched on. It proved he was still capable, but also showed how little Ferrari gave him to work with. Off track, Hamilton tried to push solutions himself. Reports confirmed he was holding regular meetings with Fred Vasseur and the top brass, John Elkann, Benedetto Vigna, bringing his Mercedes-honed knowledge and even documents outlining structural changes. It wasn't just about driving anymore. Hamilton was trying to re-engineer Ferrari's operating system from the inside. Publicly, he stressed he was going the extra mile. Privately, it was clear even he knew that talent alone wasn't enough in this environment. Outside the garage, the media pounced. With struggles mounting, speculation over 2026 seats started, and names like Carlos Sainz inevitably popped up. The irony was impossible to ignore. Ferrari had released Sainz to bring Hamilton in, and now chatter placed Sainz as a possible replacement for the very driver who took his seat. There was no official Ferrari plan announced, but the fact speculation gained traction said everything. No one is safe from the rumor mill when results falter in Maranello. So the lesson hanging over this saga: if Hamilton, the most successful driver of modern Formula One, can't immediately bend Ferrari to his will, then maybe no one can. He's still fighting, still pushing, still trying to turn it around, but the solution Ferrari chased starts to look like another trap of their own making. And if the GOAT is struggling to find his way, imagine what it does to drivers who arrived with nothing but momentum and confidence. Sebastian Vettel, the four-time champion who forgot how to count to 5. Sebastian Vettel's Ferrari chapter started with the weight of destiny. 4 straight titles at Red Bull, still in his prime, and arriving in 2015 as the heir apparent to Michael Schumacher's legacy. Ferrari saw him as the chosen one, and Vettel himself framed the move as chasing his childhood dream. The plan was simple: a German champion reviving the Scuderia the way his hero had done. But instead of a new dynasty, Vettel found turbulence, leadership changes, shifting priorities, and a team that couldn't give him the solid base he thrived on. Almost immediately, he traded stability for chaos. At Red Bull, he'd had Adrian Newey's genius designs as his foundation. At Ferrari, the structure kept collapsing beneath him. Maurizio Arrivabene's tenure gave way to Mattia Binotto. Sergio Marchionne's death reshaped the culture, and every year management treated next season as the answer to every shortcoming. It meant Vettel was always waiting for the real fight to begin, caught in a cycle of resets that never ended. Instead of fine-tuning for championships, he was scrambling just to keep momentum alive. The stress leaked out in his radio comms. Over time, his voice went from calm precision to cracks of emotion, shouting, sighing, sarcastic one-liners, or long pauses heavy with frustration. Once, when a strategy call unraveled mid-race, he snapped audibly before forcing himself to continue. It wasn't just venting. Fans heard a 4-time world champion losing patience with the very environment that was supposed to unlock his next chapter. Compared to Red Bull, where he had an aura of control, Ferrari made him sound more like a man constantly patching leaks in the dam. The 2018 season defined the paradox. Ferrari's car was finally good enough to fight for a title, yet mistakes piled up. Strategy errors cost him points, and on Vettel's side, small spins and misjudgments began creeping in, each magnified under the microscope of a team desperate for glory. It felt like both the driver and the team were feeding each other's insecurities. Ferrari wobbling under pressure, Vettel pressing harder to cover the gaps, and both collapsing at critical moments. By the time the title slipped away to Lewis Hamilton, the window was gone. Ferrari had waited years for a car like that, and still managed to waste it. Charles Leclerc's arrival in 2019 only sharpened the knife. Suddenly, Vettel wasn't the undisputed #1 anymore. Leclerc brought pace immediately, started taking poles, and even beat him on Sundays. Instead of being given clear authority, Vettel had to split focus, sometimes supported, sometimes not, and that unclear pecking order ate away at his confidence. What was supposed to be a Schumacher-style empire turned into a rivalry with his own garage. Add a slower car in 2020, and the trajectory was sealed. In the end, Vettel's Ferrari story closed not with glory, but with exhaustion. He walked in as the man expected to revive the Scuderia, and walked out having lost momentum rather than gained it. The titles on his resume stayed frozen at 4, and the aura of invincibility he carried from Red Bull faded under the weight of red politics and missed opportunities. He didn't forget how to drive. Ferrari just never gave him the conditions to expand his legacy. That twist sums up what so many big names have learned. Joining Ferrari often shrinks your story instead of expanding it. And that brings us to the bigger pattern. The thing drivers keep convincing themselves they can beat but almost never do. It's the phenomenon we can only call the Ferrari effect. The Ferrari effect. Why do so many brilliant drivers convince themselves Ferrari is the answer? That's the trap at the heart of the Ferrari effect. It's the gravitational pull where world champions, rising stars, and seasoned veterans all arrive in Maranello thinking, "I'll be the one to finally tame this beast." Then months later, they're slumped at press conferences, looking like the fight's been drained out of them before the season's even over. Every newcomer buys into the same illusion, the dream of sleek red power, tifosi chanting their name, and lifting trophies at Monza. To wear that red suit feels like destiny, but once the curtain lifts, destiny turns out to be frantic. Strategy calls passed off as passion, and pit stops executed with the urgency of a pocket watch ticking in slow motion. Ferrari packages confusion and glamour, and drivers sign on thinking they're part of a legend. What they're actually signing into is organized chaos that somehow never changes. Two patterns make this cycle so relentless. First, Ferrari's prestige is blinding. The team has been in every Formula One season since the beginning, their heritage dwarfs everyone else's, and nothing feels bigger than bringing Ferrari back to glory. Even rational, calculating drivers convince themselves that victory here matters more than anywhere else, so they overlook the warning signs. Second, the instability never stops. Team principals rotate, leadership reshuffles, and strategy divisions seem to answer to whoever grabs the loudest voice that weekend. With no consistent vision, even the best drivers eventually collide with the same wall of dysfunction. History proves it repeatedly. Prost was fired in 1991 after branding his shock-broken Ferrari a truck. Alonso dragged slower cars within 3 points of a title in 2012 before his frustration broke through in interviews. Vettel lost momentum completely as leadership changed hands, watching his shot at a Schumacher 2.0 legacy collapse under him. And even Salo, drafted as a mid-season stand-in, had to surrender a near-certain win at Hockenheim to serve the team's bigger picture. These aren't isolated disasters, they're the rule. The Ferrari effect is a cycle. First, the dream. The driver signs, the Tifosi light flares, the media paints it as destiny. Then comes arrival. The car feels heavier than expected. The simulator gains don't show up on track. The frustration stage follows. Radio messages turn sharp, crossed arms appear in the garage, and every strategy mistake adds more cracks. Finally, disillusionment. The interviews sound more like farewells than battle cries, and leaving becomes the only real solution. It's not just about slow cars. Every team builds a dud now and again. What makes Ferrari different is that they build psychological burnout into the package. The dream of becoming Ferrari's savior usually ends with drivers carrying scars, patience shredded, and championships that will never exist. The badge is supposed to add to their legacy, but more often it erases years of peak potential. So the big takeaway is this: Ferrari doesn't just test machinery, it tests people. It's less a race team and more like a grand experiment in how long elite drivers can convince themselves passion outweighs dysfunction. And somehow, new volunteers keep lining up to try. What about you though? Which Ferrari collapse do you think was the most shocking? Prost's firing, Alonso's near miss, Vettel's slow fade, or someone else entirely? Drop it in the comments because I want to know which part of the cycle surprised you most. And if you think the Ferrari effect is only about big-name champions, think again. Even the stand-ins aren't allowed to escape clean, and nobody learned that harder than Mika Salo. Mika Salo, the stand-in, who lost his win. In 1999, Mika Salo found himself with an opportunity most drivers only fantasize about. He hadn't come in as Ferrari's golden ticket. He wasn't even meant to be anywhere near the spotlight. When Michael Schumacher broke his leg at Silverstone, Ferrari needed someone to hold the fort, and Salo was the stand-in. The job description was simple: stay out of trouble, bring home points, and support the team. But then came the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim, where fate decided to stir the pot. Through clean driving, solid pace, and some smart pit sequencing, Salo wasn't just keeping up. He was suddenly at the front of the race, leading the German Grand Prix in a Ferrari. For a driver who'd never been close to consistent podiums, let alone wins, this was the lottery win. It wasn't about a top 10 finish anymore. He was laps away from a first career victory that could have defined him forever, a fairy tale shot to add his name to Ferrari's long, dazzling roll of winners. But Ferrari doesn't hand out fairy tales without a catch. Over the radio, Ross Brawn's voice came through cool and deliberate. "I want you to let Eddie pass this lap. No drama, no screaming, just matter-of-fact strategy." The message was clear. Salo wasn't there to chase glory. His role was to deliver points for Eddie Irvine, Ferrari's designated title contender in Schumacher's absence. The team had decided long before that everything would orbit around Irvine's championship push. And just like that, destiny got shut down in one sentence. On the back straight, Salo lifted, Irvine swept by, and the headlines evaporated. Eddie crossed the line first. Ferrari gained precious championship points, and Salo crossed second knowing full well what he'd given up. The cameras didn't even catch the swap properly. It was almost like Ferrari had stage managed the most gutting moment of Salo's career off-screen. All he had left was the second-place trophy and the knowledge that his one shot at becoming a Grand Prix winner had been sacrificed. Afterward, Irvine was quick to admit the truth. Mika was the star today, and he won the race. He even offered Salo the winner's trophy as a nod to the reality everyone knew. Salo did take it home, though in a twist of irony, Irvine later asked for the second-place trophy back, and it broke in delivery. No trophy, no official win, no permanent place in the record books. The only story that stuck was the invisible team order that had rewritten his fate. What stung even more was that the sacrifice changed nothing. Irvine's extra points weren't enough. He still lost the championship to Hakkinen. Salo himself later admitted he regretted pulling over, saying he wished he hadn't because it didn't make any difference in the end. It wasn't just a hollow gesture, it was a career-defining fork in the road where where personal ambition had to be swallowed whole. He followed Ferrari's instructions, but the payoff never came, and once Schumacher returned, the message was even clearer. Salo slipped straight back into the shadows. No contract extension, no hero treatment, just gratitude for keeping the seat warm. The only consolation was that his strong drive at Ferrari did help secure him later moves in F1, and eventually, a successful run in sports cars, even winning Le Mans in GT categories. He stayed on good terms with Ferrari's inner circle, but the chance to be a Grand Prix winner was erased forever. That's Ferrari logic in its purest form. One driver's miracle erased so another's title fight could stay alive. And the man Salo gave way to, he was about to discover that Ferrari's commitment only went so far. Eddie Irvine, the almost man. 1999 was the season Eddie Irvine almost rewrote Ferrari's story. After years of being Michael Schumacher's sidekick, always the number 2 in strategy meetings and on team orders, Eddie suddenly became the main act when Schumacher broke his leg at Silverstone. Ferrari had no choice but to push him forward, and to nearly everyone's surprise, he made it work. He opened the year with a win in Australia, proving he wasn't just there to collect scraps. For once, Ferrari's championship hopes were riding on Irvine's shoulders, and it actually looked like he could carry them. This was his golden window to prove he was more than Schumacher's backup. Podiums kept coming, wins stacked up, and with McLaren battling reliability issues, Irvine turned consistency into momentum. The tension grew with each weekend. Could Ferrari deliver him a real shot at the title, or was he just a placeholder until Schumacher's return? Even as Ferrari handed him opportunities, the atmosphere was unmistakable. The team was built around Schumacher, and even in his absence, the hierarchy stayed in place. Irvine was trusted, but only as a temporary solution. The German Grand Prix that summer summed it up. With Mika Salo leading, Ross Brawn's cool voice came over the radio. "I want you to let Eddie pass this lap." Salo obeyed, Irvine got the win, and Ferrari's machine kept its pecking order intact. On paper, it was support for Eddie. In reality, it showed that Ferrari's system didn't bend. It just reassigned roles until Schumacher's eventual return. Even then, the aura of number 1 never shifted away from him. Still, Irvine fought on. He scrapped for points, took hard-earned victories, and entered the final race of the year in a position no one predicted months earlier. One showdown in Japan to decide the championship. He and Hakkinen went in separated by the tightest of margins. All it would take was one more perfect Sunday, and Ferrari's understudy could have taken the crown. It was that close, that raw, and the hype was real. But Ferrari blinked. The car prep wasn't sharp enough, strategy wasn't spot on, and when the title came down to Suzuka, Hakkinen delivered. 2 points. That was the final gap. After an entire year of overachieving, after rising out of Schumacher's shadow, Eddie Irvine missed the championship by just 2 points. Those digits burn in history, because it proved that for all his efforts, Ferrari never completely rallied around him. They wanted Schumacher's comeback more than they wanted Eddie's present shot at glory, and it slipped through their fingers. After that, Irvine saw there was no future for him as Ferrari's chosen leader. In 2000, he left for Jaguar, finally walking into a team where he was officially the number 1. But instead of becoming a contender, he discovered just how painful a slow car and half-baked project can be. Jaguar gave him status, but no tools, and any shot at another title fight was gone. His entire story as a contender began and ended in that single, fragile 1999 season. Eddie Irvine came closer than anyone else in a generation to breaking through Ferrari's internal hierarchy, yet the team's loyalty patterns kept him in the role of almost man. And that leaves us with the big truth running under all these stories. The fact that Ferrari's legend and its curse are the exact same thing. Ferrari sits at the crossroads of glory and frustration. It's the most iconic badge in Formula One, yet driving it means living under pressure no other team creates. Champions, underdogs, and stand-ins all discover the same reality. The prestige gets you in the door, but instability eventually drives you back out. Again and again, the only real escape has been to leave. That's the cycle. Drivers arrive chasing history and leave nursing wounds, because the real championship at Ferrari isn't trophies. It's surviving the therapy sessions disguised as strategy calls. So tell me, whose Ferrari journey hurts the most? Prost, Alonso, Vettel, Hamilton, or poor Mika Salo?